Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. No tanks rolled in, no missiles lit up the sky, and yet, in the last 5 years, Russia has done something it failed to achieve in Ukraine, bring an entire country under its control. Over the last 5 years, Moscow has done to Belarus what imperial states dream of doing, turning a neighboring country into a forward operating base. It didn't happen through blitzkrieg, but through something far more durable: political, military, and economic entanglement. The ties are so deep that Belaruss sovereignty is now a little more than a legal fiction. If you're looking for the clearest example of how Russia likes to rewrite the map without firing a shot, look no further. And here's the remarkable part. Most of this happened while the world was busy watching Ukraine. Welcome to Belarus, Moscow's quiet conquest. Here's a look at our latest report.
Belarus is still on the map, but the decisions are made elsewhere. Since 2020, Moscow has turned its neighbor into a client state, and Lukashenko is holding on by only Putin's grace. Sanctions meant to punish him only tighten the noose. Loans, markets and soldiers come from Russia at the cost of Belarusian sovereignty. Today, foreign policy decisions are made in Moscow, not Minsk. The Kremlin's grip is not just political. It runs through Belarus's economy, military and media. Russian state narratives dominate television, joint military drills are now routine, and key industries are increasingly owned or financed by Russian interests. For older Belarusians, the arrangement feels like a return to Soviet times. Only this time, the Kremlin's control is quieter, subtler and harder to break.
Everything is built on fear, on lies, and sooner or later, this pyramid will collapse. There is already huge experience in history. This is the Soviet Union, right? We all know this from history.
For Putin, Belarus is a forward base. In 2022, Russian troops launched into Ukraine from its territory. Now, tactical nuclear weapons there threaten NATO's eastern flank and the Baltic states. Its geography makes it even more dangerous. In any future conflict, Belarus could serve as a launchpad to cut through the Suwałki Gap, the narrow land bridge between Poland and Lithuania that links NATO to the Baltic states, and separating NATO from Russia's Kaliningrad exclave. Seizing it would split the alliance in two. 5 years on, the opposition is divided, the regime entrenched and Russia's grip complete. Belarus may keep its name and flag, but its independence exists only on paper. And paper, as history shows, burns easily.
And now let's zone in on the east-playing portion of our show. Since the 2020 crackdown, Belarus has spiraled deeper into dictatorship and dependency. Western sanctions were meant to isolate the regime, but 5 years on, it's ordinary Belarusians who are paying the highest price. Here's how life has changed.
Election was rigged, and the backlash historic. Nearly 7,000 people were detained in 4 days, with over 1,300 political prisoners still behind bars. Independent media was banned, civil society dismantled, and 500,000 Belarusians fled into exile. In response, the EU, US, UK and others imposed sanctions, travel bans, banking blacklists, export controls and border restrictions. But the regime survived, and ordinary citizens suffered. Businesses lost access to banks, visa rules tightened, consulates shut down. Even basic medicine became scarce as Western firms pulled out. Sanctions didn't hit Lukashenko's allies. Many profited, trading more with Russia. The regime now hides business records to dodge sanctions lists. Meanwhile, the Kremlin stepped in. Belarus became a launchpad for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, hosting troops and even nuclear weapons. Opportunists help regime-connected elites dodge restrictions, selling fake EU residencies and setting up shell firms. At the same time, some dissidents were denied asylum in Europe. The regime grew stronger, while the opposition became weaker, divided and underfunded. Today, Belarus is a buffer zone, repressive, isolated and firmly under Russian control. Sanctions were meant to weaken the regime. Instead, they pushed it further into Putin's orbit, with civilians caught in the middle.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Belarus' story as Moscow's satellite state didn't start yesterday. For years, President Alexander Lukashenko balanced between Russia and the West, flirting with NATO, seeking trade with the EU, and even refusing to recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea until 2021. Then came the August 2020 presidential election, or more accurately, the August 2020 theatrical performance in which Lukashenko claimed victory against all evidence. The protests that followed were the largest in Belarus's modern history. The crackdown that followed was bloody, to say the least, and who kept Lukashenko in power? The Kremlin, not the Belarusian people, that's for sure. So that was the moment Minsk stopped pretending that it had an independent path. Since 2021, Russian troops have enjoyed an unprecedented level of freedom in Belarus. They don't need new bases, they have the run of the country. They invaded Ukraine from Belarusian soil in February 2022. They permanently deployed aircraft, air defense systems, and allegedly since 2023, tactical nuclear weapons. Belarus's airspace is now part of an integrated defense system controlled by the Russian General Staff. In practical terms, that means Belarus doesn't control its skies anymore. And the land? Moscow's already talking about stationing entire maneuver divisions there, which would put NATO's eastern flank, especially the Suwalki corridor, under direct sustained threat. The genius, if we can call it that, is how little formal paperwork was needed. This is annexation by integration. It's not just about what Belarus can give Russia now, it's about making sure Belarus can never economically survive without Russia. They're laying the groundwork for supranational institutions that could one day govern both countries. The Union State, once dismissed as a symbolic gesture, is becoming a functional framework for joint executive, legislative, and judicial bodies. It's the architecture of annexation, just without the ceremony. And the best part? None of this will change if Putin passes tomorrow. The idea that Belarusians are just temporarily lost Russians is embedded in the mindset of Russia's political elite. This is the first attempted absorption of an entire sovereign country since the Second World War. And it's happening in slow motion. Russia's quiet conquest works because it's gradual and wrapped in the language of cooperation. It doesn't trigger the kind of urgent response that tanks in the streets would. Belarus is the cautionary tale that the West didn't want to hear. It shows that you can lose your independence without losing a war. And it proves that Moscow's playbook is much bigger than the invasion of Ukraine. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Alina Koshuk, head of Belsat TV. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So today we're trying to examine the Belarus and its sovereignty. From the outside looking in, I think a lot of us are seeing Belarus as kind of a Russia light, or Russia you order from Temu, like the little brother. But has it always been this way, and how would you describe Belarus's sovereignty right now?
Actually, we don't like this naming as a smaller brother, because this is one of propaganda narratives which Russian state TV and propagandists are sharing, saying that Belarusians are not fully developed nation or something like that. That we are like smaller, not so rich, not so big as Russia, but the thing is that we are normal European or pro-European nation. As for sovereignty, of course, Belarus now seems like to be a satellite of Russia. And actually, all what Alexander Lukashenko is doing is supporting this narrative. Recently, he was visiting Russia together with Vladimir Putin, Alexander Lukashenko. They visited Vala Monastery, and it was on one hand like a personal pilgrimage. You know, they were talking about a lot of Orthodox faith and so on, but on the other hand we had a lot of statements being made during this visit as well. One of them was assurance of full support of Russia, of Belarus, and moreover Lukashenko is also telling that Russia is a guarantee of Belarusian sovereignty.
All right, now, things in Belarus seem to have deteriorated very fast since 2020, and while Lukashenko coming into power, I think is a very big turning point as well. What do you think the West didn't really see this kind of quiet conquest coming even after this big event in 2020 and all the crackdown?
You know, before I think, great decisions, Lukashenko is going to Moscow to discuss it first in Moscow, and then some decisions on some diplomatic states to be made. We saw it before Kit Kellogg visit to Minsk. Also, Lukashenko had a close contact with Moscow, and then some decisions were made, and then Lukashenko was talking to Kit Kellogg. For European Union and for United States, of course, Belarus is a problem because this is a closest neighbor of Poland and other European nation states. This is unfortunately neighbor which is not safe. So we know that problems that we have on the border with illegal immigrants, but not only with this. I think that now Polish army is aware of some security issues. Upcoming military drills, Zapad 2025, will be held in September, in the middle of September. So we know that Belarus is a threat now to European countries. But of course, we see that European leaders are fully supporting those parts of Belarusian society which is saying that Belarus should have a right to choose the authorities, that Lukashenko, of course, is a dictator. And now we have some new lines in these, let's say, communications. Recently, Belarusian Democratic Forces proposed a kind of national dialogue with representatives of regime, but not personally with Alexander Lukashenko. There are a lot of rumors and a lot of discussions about that, how this dialogue should look like. But I should remember that this is not a new idea. Actually, this is what Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is what have been talking since 2020, because we need a national dialogue. But it's difficult to talk to a dictator who is still repressing people inside the country and threatening people outside the country.
Right, so we're actually looking down at a very pivotal point right now for Belarus. It could go either way, maybe with more of these crackdowns, the kind of iron-fistedness of Lukashenko and his cooperation with Vladimir Putin. We're talking also about this, the potential of Belarus becoming the permanent staging ground for Russian military operations against NATO because of all these military drills. But at the same time, like you mentioned, the civil society and Belarusians themselves do want to adhere closer to the Western values, to kind of break free from this dictatorship. As of your current read right now, what direction do you think is Belarus heading towards? Do you think that Lukashenko still has such an iron grip that he's going to continue to push down his path, or do you foresee a world where some of the pushback from the civil society and the help of the West is going to eventually prevail?
You know, unfortunately, Belarus more and more being a country under Iron Curtain, unfortunately. We saw it during USSR. I remember my childhood. I remember how it was. And now it's not like this, but you know, that crossing the border with the European Union is extremely difficult for Belarusians. There are huge queues, and there is only one gate open in Brest, the people can cross the border. That's why, yes, Belarusian dictatorship is conservative here in the country. But we see that in economy, for example, the results are not that great. And without Russian support, without money from Russian oil and Russian gas, it would be difficult to Lukashenko, you know, to keep country in this condition where people could live more or less stable. What we see also that costs in Belarusian shops are inflating. Going higher. Inflation is for next year is prognosed even to 10%, I think. So Belarus is not in a good condition itself. So for Lukashenko, it's more and more difficult, you know, to keep the country. But nevertheless, he's the person who is keeping power in Belarus. But still, this fight is ongoing. And even after 5 years of 2020, we still have Belarusian democratic forces, some institutions which are operating, which are communicating both with the United States and Brussels. That's why we see that I think that a slight window of opportunity for some national dialogue can be maybe after Alaska talks. We see that Lukashenko, of course, now on the side of Vladimir Putin in this war, but Belarusian people are not. That's why we believe that with the help of European Union and partners from the West, maybe there will be an opportunity of Belarus to get rid of Lukashenko and start a new chapter in our history. Remember, 30 years we have the same person in power. You cannot imagine this in normal countries, but there is a thing like this. But I believe that Belarusian society is absolutely ready for a new chapter.
Right, when I have discussions with people, from Belsat, they usually tell me that there's a lot of problem in Belarus, and there is one that actually has a name. And the problem with in Belarus is called Lukashenko because of how long he's been in power and kind of taking the country down that direction. You just mentioned earlier how Russia has pretty much created this dependency for Belarus to have to rely on its resources to kind of stay afloat economically. So if the civil society is going to somehow overthrow Lukashenko, do you think that there's anything the Western countries need to be able to participate to kind of help reverse this trend of having to overly rely on Russia, seeing that, well, something needs to kind of replace their presence there, right?
Some representatives of Belarusian, let's say, opposition, like Zenon Pozniak, they say that sanctions are pushing Lukashenko even closer to Russia. But we believe that sanctions are making Lukashenko weaker. Okay. And the rejection of sanctions is one of the most important points of Lukashenko diplomacy, that they say, take away sanctions and we will start to talk to you. And we know that there are some talks, of course, on very secret level between, which are held by not European diplomacy, but American diplomacy, where we try to exchange political prisoners on some maybe sanctions or something, but you know, this is a very tricky issue. That's why what can be done by European leaders to be more persuasive, be more vocal, because even people who were released from the jail, like Sergei Tikhanovsky, Antonina Konovalova and others, they say, don't let him take away. Lukashenko should be punished, and people are continuing their fight. Of course, now you cannot see these beautiful red-white flags on the streets of Belarus, but we believe that one day they will come, because people are still having these flags. They are hidden very much down on the earth, like some of my colleagues saying me that, but still believe that this day will come, because society is ready. We need more support from European nations, but also Belarusian situation very much depend on how peace talks on Ukraine will go. And I think this is now a key point to our situation as well.
Right, so yeah, definitely a turning point, and we'll have to see how these discussions turn out. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on the Eastern Express.
Thank you.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Ukraine may ease border restrictions for young men under 22. The government is trying to stop a growing brain drain.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has instructed officials to consider loosening martial law rules for Ukrainians under 22, allowing them to travel abroad. Currently, men aged 18 to 60 are banned from leaving, even if they are not yet eligible for the draft. The move follows alarming demographic data. In 2024, Ukraine recorded its lowest student enrollment in 9 years and the smallest number of school children in 3 decades. Many 17-year-olds have been leaving early to avoid travel bans at 18. prompting fears of a lasting talent flight. Zelensky says the aim is to help young people pursue education while staying connected to Ukraine, but experts warn time is running out.
Russians are packing up and leaving Turkey in large numbers. The economic crisis and visa rules are driving the exodus.
The number of Russians living in Turkey has nearly halved in 2 years, from 154,000 in 2023 to just 85,000 today, according to the Russian embassy in Ankara. Soaring inflation, tight rental markets and cancelled resident permits are forcing even long-term residents to leave. Some districts are now closed for foreign buyers, and short-term tourist visas are no longer being renewed. Many are returning to Russia, while others are heading for Serbia, Georgia or the EU. Analysts describe the trend as part of Russia's biggest emigration wave since the 1920s, with over 6 million people estimated to have left the country during Putin's time in power.
As Russia bans migrant workers at home, it's importing labor from North Korea. But news reports expose horrific conditions behind the Kremlin's quiet recruitment drive.
St. Petersburg has expanded its ban on migrant workers, now forbidding them from courier and delivery jobs. Dozens of Russian regions have introduced similar restrictions, targeting mainly Central Asian laborers, despite a nationwide shortage of over 2.5 million workers. To fill the gap, Russia is bringing in thousands of North Koreans. A BBC investigation reveals they endure near slavery, 20-hour shifts, squat-lit housing and constant surveillance. Most are smuggled in on fake student visas, with Pyongyang seizing the bulk of their pay. Despite a UN ban, the number of North Korean laborers in Russia could hit 50,000 by the end of the year.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.